Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series in which we take a look at low-price commanders and make budget decks with them. My name is Grazzet and today we'll be looking at a build featuring Mishra's sadistic apprentice, Ashnod the Uncaring. But before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. And if you're feeling particularly generous, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description to keep me caffeinated as I work on more of these builds. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see who won last week's poll and what commanders you'll be voting for an upcoming episode. So with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Ashnod the Uncaring is a 1/4 human artificer with death touch that costs 2, a blue, a black, and a red that has the following ability. Whenever we activate an ability of an artifact or creature that isn't a mana ability, if one or more permanents were sacrificed to activate it, we may copy that ability. We may choose new targets for the copy. Breaking down her core stats, Ashnod is sporting a decent-sized CMC, a stat block that's severely below the norm for her cost but with built-in death touch to compensate somewhat for her low power, and an ability that allows us to double up on the sacrifice effects of our artifacts and creatures to provide an impressive amount of value. Taking a closer look at this ability, despite being limited to creatures and artifacts, as well as being limited to activated abilities only, which does admittedly prevent some very common sack effects and outlets from being able to benefit from it, the ability to double up on sack effects even with these limitations is still quite powerful. Case in point, Grixis has no shortage of creatures and artifacts that can put this ability to very good use, ranging from sack outlets that we can now generate double the value or damage from as we use them, to self-sacking artifacts and creatures whose abilities are amplified while Ashnod is on the battlefield, her mere presence elevating mediocre sack effects into good ones and already good ones into amazing ones. So, as clearly demonstrated by her ability, Ashnod is a commander that's all in on sacrifice effects, aiming to get us as much value as possible as our creatures and artifacts sack themselves or others. And while we do have the option to take this build in a strictly sacrifice-focused direction, I opted instead to take it in an artifact-themed sacrifice direction to also take advantage of the plethora of superb artifact support we have in our colors. Of course, that means we'll be running plenty of creatures and artifacts with the ability to sack other artifacts away for value, along with a solid number of ways to create artifact tokens throughout the course of the game to ensure we always have sack fodder at our disposal, in addition to running some self-sacking artifacts to proc our commander without the need for sack outlets. And to further take advantage of all the artifacts we'll be assembling and scrapping, we'll be including a good number of sources that can turn them into burn as they enter and leave play, allowing us to deal significant damage to our opponents as we generate value. So let's turn back the pages on Dominaria's history and reveal the truth behind Ashnod. While Dominaria will always remember her as a cruel and sadistic artificer, which indeed she was also a key player in preventing the plane from falling to Gix and the Phyrexians, as without her, Urza would have never obtained the Silex and defeated his brother and Ashnod's mentor, Mishra. Whether a hero or a villain, however, her genius was undeniable, with many still sacrificing at her altar for the power it grants them until this day. So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's start looking at the deck itself by starting with the creatures. Starting off in the CMC1 slot, we have its only 2 members with Disciple of the Vault and Combat Courier. Disciple of the Vault is a 1/1 that, whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from play, we may have target opponent lose 1 life, making it a dirt cheap and reliable means to turn our artifacts into burn as we sack them away for value to help whittle down our opponent's life totals. Combat Courier is another 1/1, this time with Unearth for a blue that we can pay 2 and sack to draw a card, serving as a cheap artifact body that we can turn into a draw 2 alongside our commander twice per game, which can both help replenish our hands and proc our artifact payoffs for even more value or damage. Then proceeding to the CMC2 slot, we'll be continuing on the artifact sacking game plan with Chronomancer and Goblin Engineer. Chronomancer is a 1/1 with flying and Unearth for 2 and a black that lets us pay 1, tap it, and sack another artifact to draw a card, providing us with a cheap and repeatable way to turn our artifacts into card advantage on an evasive artifact body to get in for additional damage that we can even temporarily reanimate for 1 last swing or sack if needed. Goblin Engineer is a 1/2 that, when it ETBs, lets us search our deck for any artifact and sends it to our graveyard, in addition to letting us pay a red, tap it, and sack an artifact to return target CMC 3 or less artifact from our graveyard back into play, making it quite the efficient artifact tutor as it comes down by setting up our graveyard with an artifact that it can then cheaply put into play for us next turn, and later, with Ashnod's help, allowing us to reanimate 2 artifacts for the price of 1 to keep our artifact count high despite us constantly sacking them. It's then on to some artifact token generators as we move deeper into this slot with Third Path Iconoclast and Loyal Apprentice, both being 2/1s that create 1/1 artifact creature tokens, the former doing so whenever we cast a non-creature spell, and the latter only doing so at the beginning of our combat phase if we control our commander, but creating a token with flying and giving it haste until end of turn to compensate. Each working well as easy to enable sources of artifact bodies to proc our artifact payoffs and to provide our artifact sack outlets with fodder to use. Speaking of sack fodder, we'll also be running Mere Retriever, a 1/1 that, when it dies, lets us return another artifact from our graveyard back to hand, making it a great body to sack to both generate value and recur our previously sacked and or destroyed artifacts to be used again, all while being easily recurable itself through other means. Then closing out this slot, we have Reckless Fireweaver, a 1/3 that, whenever an artifact ETBs under our control, deals 1 damage to each opponent, again allowing us to tack some decent AoE burn as our artifacts and artifact tokens enter play to continually chisel away at our opponent's life totals. The CMC 3 slot is then up next, opening up with a fresh wave of red sack outlets in the form of Audacious Reshapers, Brea's Apprentice, and Farad Enterprising Salvager. Audacious Reshapers is a 3/3 that lets us tap it and sack an artifact to reveal cards off the top of our deck until we reveal an artifact card, putting that card into play and putting the rest of the revealed cards at the bottom of our deck in a random order, while also dealing 1 damage to us for each card revealed this way. The self-burn it inflicts on us being a very small price to pay for the ability to turn an artifact token into 2 random artifacts from our deck at no mana cost at instant speed alongside our commander. Brea's Apprentice is a 2/3 that creates a 1/1 flying artifact token when it ETBs and lets us tap it and sack an artifact for one of the following effects: exile the top card of our deck and letting us play that card until end of turn, or giving target creature +2/+0 until end of turn, which we'll be primarily running for the free Impulse Draw it provides on an artifact body that comes into play with a free body to sack, though the power increase it provides can be situationally useful to get some extra damage in if the opportunity presents itself. Farad is another 3/3 that, whenever another non-token artifact we control is put into the graveyard from play, creates an artifact scrap token, in addition to letting us pay 1 a red and sack an artifact for one of the following effects: put a +1/+1 counter on Farad and give him menace until end of turn, go to target creature, or discard a card and draw a card. The passive artifact token creation he provides working very well alongside our artifact sack heavy playstyle, while his own sack effects are respectable as well to turn him into a beat stick, compel attacks, or help prune our hands as needed. Then we have a blue sack outlet and token creator joining us with Psymaster Thopterist, a 1/4 that creates a 1/1 flying artifact creature token whenever we cast an artifact spell, and lets us pay 1 a blue and sack 2 artifacts to draw a card, providing us with even more artifact token creation to help proc our artifact payoffs and enable our sack outlets, while his own sack effect is a decent way to refill our hands as well as a means to sack high volumes of artifacts to further proc our artifact death payoffs. Burnished Heart then joins us as a self-sacking artifact entry, being a 2/2 that lets us pay 3 and sack it to put 2 basic lands from our deck into play tapped, which is usually a decent source of land-based ramp, but here, alongside Ashnod, ramps us by 4 lands instead, literally doubling the land ramp it provides while also being easily recurable to be used over and over again. Speaking of recursion, we have a pair of artifact recurring creatures joining our ranks as we delve deeper into this slot with Scrap Trawler and Emery Lurker of the Loch. Scrap Trawler is a 3/2 that, whenever it or another artifact we control is sent from the field to our graveyard, lets us return an artifact of lesser CMC from our graveyard back to hand, providing our build with some solid artifact recursion as we sack away our bigger artifacts or they're destroyed by our opponents. Emery is a 1/2 that costs 1 less for each artifact we control, mills us for 4 when she ETBs, and lets us tap her and choose an artifact in our graveyard to let us cast that artifact that turn, being easily castable for a single blue thanks to our high artifact density and giving us yet another repeatable way to bring back our artifacts from the bin, with her ETB mill also setting herself up as well as our other recursion sources in the event that there are no good targets in our grave when she comes down. We then have some additional sources of damage and burn closing out this slot with Mayhem Devil and Ingenious Artillerist, the former being a 3/3 that deals 1 damage to any target whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, and the latter being a 3/1 that, whenever one or more artifacts CTB under our control, deals that much damage to each opponent, each taking advantage of our high volume of sack effects and artifacts respectively to continue piling on the damage into our opponents. Now entering the CMC4 slot, the first half brings us the legendary entrant Joyra Weatherlight Captain, a 3/3 that draws us a card whenever we cast a historic spell, making her a simple but effective form of card advantage that benefits from our large artifact base to keep our hands nice and full. The second half of this slot then adds Solemn Simulacrum to our artifact creature lineup, a 2/2 that, when it ETBs, puts a basic land from our deck into play tapped and, when it dies, draws us a card, providing us with a decent source of land-based ramp on an artifact body to proc our payoffs, which we can then use as sack fodder and get an extra card out of as we do so for some additional value. Continuing on to the CMC5 slot, we have another pair of entrants joining our ranks with Kuldotha Forgemaster and Mishra Eminent One. Kuldotha Forgemaster is a 3/5 that lets us tap it and sack 3 artifacts to put an artifact from our deck into play. Its powerful tutor effect allowing us to turn our swaths of cheap artifacts and tokens into win conditions at no mana cost, and again, doing so twice with Ashnod for double the potency. Mishra is a 5/4 that, at the beginning of combat on our turn, creates a copy of target non-creature artifact we control except it's called Mishra's Warframe, is a 4/4, gains haste, and sacks itself on the next end step, enabling us to easily create temporary copies of our artifacts to either use as sack fodder, get extra uses out of their sack effects, or use as 4/4 beat sticks as needed. Nearing the end now, the CMC6 slot brings us its only 2 entrants, Marionette Master and Brutaclad Telcor Engineer. Marionette Master is a 1/3 with Fabricate 3 that, whenever an artifact we control is sent from the field to the graveyard, has target opponent lose life equal to Marionette Master's power, which will almost always be choosing to turn into a 4/6 with its Fabricate to effectively turn it into a scaled up Disciple of the Vault, allowing us to pile on the damage even more as we sack away our artifacts. Brutaclad is a 4/4 that gives all tokens we control haste and, at the beginning of combat on our turn, creates a 2/1 artifact token and then lets us turn all tokens we control into copies of target token we control. His passive token creation being nice to help build up our board, but his real strength lying in his ability to transform all our artifact tokens into whatever token we most need at the time, whether that be bodies to attack in with, treasures to ramp us further, or clues to refill our hands, giving all the tokens that he and our other sources create additional flexibility. And finally, reaching the CMC7 slot and our last creature entrance, we have Mere Battlesphere and Herald of Anguish. Mere Battlesphere is a 4/7 that creates 4 1/1 Mere artifact tokens when it ETBs, and, whenever it attacks, lets us tap X untapped Mere tokens to give it +X/+0 until end of turn and have it deal X damage to the player or planeswalker it's attacking. It's 5 bodies for the price of 1, providing us with a lot of sack fodder and triggers for our artifact payoffs, while also being a decent beat stick that can use the tokens it creates to power itself up and get some additional burn in to boot. Herald of Anguish is a 5/5 flyer with Improvise that, at the beginning of our end step, has each opponent discard a card in addition to letting us pay 1 a black and sack an artifact to give target creature -2/-2 until end of turn, coming down much faster than its CMC7 cost would suggest thanks to Improvise allowing our artifacts to help pay for it, and serving as both a passive source of hand disruption and repeatable source of non-destruction removal that only gets better alongside our commander, all while being able to get in for significant damage itself thanks to its large evasive stat block. That covers all our creatures, so let's move on to our instance. Skipping straight to the CMC2 slot, we have Disruption Protocol joining us as its lone entrant, which has us either tap an untapped artifact we control or pay an additional 1 to counter target spell, synergizing very well with our artifact-heavy build to provide on-theme spell disruption, slowing down our opponent's plays or preventing them from interfering with ours. The CMC3 slot then continues on the spell disruption game plan with Stoic Rebuttal, which costs 1 less if we control 3+ artifacts and counters target spell, providing us even more on-theme spell disruption that we can easily cast for its reduced cost to keep interfering with our opponent's spellcasting on the cheap. We then close out this slot and our instance with the removal spells Chaos Warp and Bedevil, the former shuffling target permanent back into its owner's deck, allowing them to reveal a top card from it and put it into play if it's a permanent, and the latter destroying target artifact, creature, or planeswalker, both serving as very flexible removal options that can help us deal with a wide variety of threats. That covers all our instance, so let's move on to our sorceries. Skipping all the way to the CMC4 slot, we have its only member, Terrasar's Devastation. An X spell that has us lose X life and create X Power Stone tokens, then gives all creatures -1/-1 for each artifact we control, usually serving as a potent non-destruction based wipe even without paying the X, but the option still being there to upcast it if we want to get some additional artifacts on board to power it up even further while providing ramp and sack fodder as well. We'll then skip all the way to the CMC9 slot for our last sorcery, Blasphemous Act, which costs 1 less for each creature in play and deals 13 damage to each creature, making it a very cheap board wipe that helps us clear the board and still have mana left over to begin rebuilding after the dust settles. That covers all our sorceries, so let's move on to our enchantments. Passing over the CMC1 and 2 slots, the CMC3 slot brings us our first 2 enchantments in the form of Agent of the Iron Throne and Mirrodin Besieged. Agent of the Iron Throne gives our commander the following ability. Whenever a creature or artifact we control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life, providing our build with another way to drain our opponent's life totals as we sack away our artifacts and creatures, this time from the relative safety of the back row as well as benefiting from the various means we're running to keep our commander alive. Mirrodin Besieged, when it ETBs, has us choose either Mirren or Phyrexian. If Mirren is chosen, we create a 1/1 Mirror artifact token whenever we cast an artifact spell, and if Phyrexian is chosen, on our end step, we draw a card, then discard a card, and then have target opponent lose the game if we have 15+ artifacts in our graveyard, which we'll usually be selecting Mirren for the excellent artifact token creation it provides as we cast our artifact spells, but its Phyrexian mode still being an effective alternate win condition if the game goes on for long enough or we draw into it late. Then reaching the CMC4 slot and our final enchantment, we have Efficient Construction, which creates a 1/1 flying artifact token whenever we cast an artifact spell, more or less serving the same purpose as the previous entry to provide us with additional artifact tokens as we cast our artifact spells to proc our payoffs and use as sack fodder, but this time producing evasive tokens that we can use to get in for damage before we sack them away for value. That covers all our enchantments, so let's move on to our artifacts. Beginning in the CMC0 slot, we have its lone entrant, Mishra's Bauble, which we can tap and sack to look at the top card of target player's library and then draw a card on the next turn's upkeep. In this build, effectively serving as a 0 mana draw 2, or as a free artifact for our sack outlets to make use of, either of which work great for this deck's artifact sack heavy playstyle. Moving on to the CMC1 slot, we have some ramp sources starting us off with Soul Ring and Wayfarer's Bauble. The former tapping for 2 colorless and the latter letting us pay 2, tap it and sack it to put a basic land from our deck into play tapped, both providing us excellent ramp for our build, and the latter being particularly good here by fetching up 2 basic lands instead of 1 while our commander's in play for even more ramp. Then as we delve deeper into this slot, we have Giant's Amulet, an equipment that equips for 2, grants the equipped creature +0/+1 and hexproof so long as it's untapped, and when it ETBs, lets us pay 3 and a blue to create a 4/4 token and attach Giant's Amulet to it, generally serving as a cheap means to grant Ashnod targeted removal protection, with the option to create additional bodies with it if we draw into it later or recur it. We then close out this slot with the self-sacking removal options Executioner's Capsule, Aether Spellbomb, and Pyrite Spellbomb. The first letting us pay 1 a black, tap it and sack it to destroy target non-black creature, the second letting us pay a blue and sack it to bounce target creature back to its owner's hand, and the third letting us pay a red and sack it to deal 2 damage to any target, with the latter 2 also giving us the option to pay 1 and sack them to draw a card, all of which double up on their removal alongside our commander for even more disruption, or in the latter 2's case, go from being cantrips into actual draw in the event we need the additional card advantage over the removal they provide. It's then on to the CMC2 slot and our Mana Rock collection, starting off with Arcane Signet, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity, Demir's Signet, Izzet's Signet, and Rakdos Signet, which we can pay 1 and tap to generate a combination of 2 of our colors, Liquimetal Torque, which taps for a colorless or we can tap to turn target non-land permanent into an artifact until end of turn, and Mind Stone, which taps for a colorless and we can pay 1, tap it and sack it to draw a card, all serving as ways to speed up and or fix our mana base to help us get to our commander and other higher CMC artifacts and artifact payoffs that much faster, with the latter 2 also providing solid utility by turning our non-artifacts into artifacts to use as sack fodder as needed, or by turning itself into a draw 2 to help refill our hands if we no longer need the ramp it provides. Then pivoting from ramp to draw, we'll also be running Mnemonic Sphere and Courier's Capsule. both of which let us pay 1 a blue and sack them to draw 2. The former also letting us channel it for a blue to draw a card, and the latter requiring us to tap it to use its effect. The potential draw 4 they provide in this build making them a fantastic way to reload our hands for relatively little cost. It's then on to some additional removal and burn with Dragon Spark Reactor, which gains a charge counter whenever it or another artifact ETBs under our control, and lets us pay 4 and sack it to deal damage equal to the number of charge counters on it to target player and target creature, working nicely with our artifact heavy build to quickly accumulate counters, which we can later use to deal with a problematic creature while also taking a decent chunk out of one of our opponent's life totals. The pair of equipment Swiftfoot Boots and Norok Stealth Suit are then up next, both of which cost 1 to equip, the former granting the equipped creature hexproof and haste, while the latter grants the equipped creature shroud instead and can be attached for double blue, each providing Ashnod with solid targeted removal protection to ensure she can stick around for longer and keep doubling our sack effects for as long as possible. And then as our last 2 entrants in this slot, we have Oni Cult Anvil and Strionic Resonator. Oni Cult Anvil, once per turn on our turn, creates a 1/1 artifact if 1 or more artifacts we control left the battlefield, and lets us tap it and sack an artifact to deal 1 damage to each opponent while we gain 1 life, serving as another source of passive artifact token creation for our other sack outlets to take advantage of, as well as being a decent sack outlet itself to help whittle away our opponent's life totals while simultaneously padding our own. Strionic Resonator lets us pay 2 and tap it to copy target triggered ability, allowing us to choose new targets for the copy, providing us with a very cheap way to copy Ashnod's ability 1 additional time to generate even more value or inflict even more damage, which helps speed up our deck considerably. The CMC3 slot is then up next, bringing us a pair of artifacts with self-sack effects with Commander Sphere and a treasure chest. Commander Sphere lets us tap it for a mana of any color in addition to letting us sack it to draw a card, making it a decent mana rock in this build that we can use to speed up and fix our mana base early that we can later turn into a draw 2 at no mana cost. Treasure Chest lets us pay 4 and sack it to roll a d20. On a 1, we lose 3 life. On a 2 through 9, we create 5 treasure tokens. On a 10 through 19, we gain 3 life and draw 3 cards. And on a 20, we search our deck for any card, putting it into play if it's an artifact or into our hand otherwise. The possibility of creating up to 10 treasure tokens, drawing us up to 6 cards, or allowing us to tutor up to 2 artifacts directly into play, making it well worth running, despite the 5% chance it has at blowing up in our face. Continuing on to the CMC4 slot, its first 2 entrants bring us even more sack outlets in the form of Smelting Vat and Trading Post. Smelting Vat lets us pay 1, tap it and sack another artifact to reveal the top 8 cards from our deck, letting us put up to 2 non-creature artifacts from among them into play of total CMC less than or equal to the sacked artifact CMC, easily allowing us to turn a single mid to high cost artifact into 4 on the cheap considering this build's high density of low CMC non-creature artifacts. Trading Post also lets us pay 1 and tap it, this time for one of the following effects. Discard a card to gain 4 life, pay 1 life to create a 0/1 token, sack a creature to return target artifact from our graveyard back to hand, or sack an artifact to draw a card, which will be running almost exclusively for its latter 2 abilities, which allow us to turn our creatures and artifacts into 2-for-1 recursion or card advantage respectively. We then have another ability copying artifact added to our arsenal in the form of Lithoform Engine, which we can pay 2 and tap to copy target activated or triggered ability we control, or pay 3 and tap to copy target instant or sorcery we control, or pay 4 and tap to copy target permanent spell we control. Like Strionic Resonator before it, allowing us to cheaply double up on our commander's ability, this time with the added flexibility of copying other types of spells if the opportunity presents itself. Then our last entrant in this slot is Machine God's Effigy, which can come into play as a non-creature artifact copy of any creature on the battlefield and can tap for a blue, providing us with a way to double up on our creature artifact payoffs and sack outlets for even more value, while also providing us additional mana to help cast our spells. Now reaching the penultimate slot of our artifact entries, the CMC5 slot adds Mirrorworks and Tamiyo's Journal to our arsenal. Mirrorworks, whenever a non-token artifact ETBs under our control, lets us pay 2 to create a token copy of it, cheaply allowing us to double up on our more valuable artifacts, whether they be our sack outlets, self-sacking artifacts, or artifact payoffs to further speed up our game plan. Tamio's Journal investigates at the beginning of our upkeep and lets us tap it and sack 3 clues to let us search our deck for any card and put it into our hand, serving as a steady supply of clue tokens that Ashnod allows us to crack at double the value, or alternatively, if we can accumulate those clues, we can cash them in for 2 tutor effects at no mana cost. Its last effect being more than capable of winning us the game on the spot if it lets us fetch up our last artifact. That artifact being the CMC6 Bolas's Citadel, which lets us look at the top card of our deck at any time and lets us play and cast those cards using our life rather than their mana cost, in addition to letting us tap it and sack 10 non-land permanents to have each opponent to lose 10 life. The future side effect it provides being powerful enough on its own as a source of card advantage if we have the life to spare, but its real power coming from its sack effect, which combined with Ashnod can cause a backbreaking 20 points of life loss to each opponent, which can be increased to a possible 30 or even 40 points of life loss with the appropriate ability copying artifacts in play, undoubtedly making it one of the most powerful artifacts at our disposal to help close out games. That covers all our artifacts, and since we have no planeswalkers in this build, let's move straight to our land base. Quickly going over our artifact lands first, we'll be running the original artifact lands Seed of Synod, Vault of Whispers, and Great Furnace, as well as the indestructible dual artifact tap lands Drossforge Bridge, Mistvault Bridge, and Silver Bluff Bridge, all of which help us proc our artifact payoffs while tapping for our colors, as well as serving as sack fodder in a pinch if necessary. Then running down our mana lands, we have Command Tower, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity, Crumbling Necropolis and Path of Ancestry, both of which also tap for any of our colors but come into play tapped, the latter also letting us scry 1 if we use that mana to cast a human or artificer, Spire of Industry, which either taps for a colorless or any color instead if we control an artifact and pay a life, Darkwater Catacombs and Shadowblood Ridge, both of which lets us pay 1 and tap to generate 2 of our colors, Smoldering Marsh and Sunken Hollow, both of which come into play tapped unless we control 2+ basic lands and tap for 1 of 2 of our colors, and Shivan Reef, which either taps for a colorless or a blue or red instead if we take a damage. Then moving on to our utility lands, we'll start off with Bojuka Bog, Buried Ruin, and Tyrite Sanctum. Bojuka Bog comes into play tapped, taps for a black, and exiles target player's graveyard when it ETBs, making it a low-maintenance form of graveyard hate from our land base to help counter graveyard-focused builds. Buried Ruin taps for a colorless and lets us pay 2, tap it and sack it to return target artifact from our grave back to hand, providing us with an extra source of artifact recursion to get a little bit more mileage out of the artifacts we sack away or are destroyed by our opponents. Tyrite Sanctum also taps for a colorless and lets us either pay 2 and tap it to give a +1/+1 counter to target legendary creature and turn it into a god, or pay 4, tap it and sack it to give target god an indestructible counter, serving as a decent way to make Ashnod indestructible and very hard for our opponents to interact with as a result, allowing us to continue benefiting from her ability with impunity. And as our last utility land, we'll be running Havengul Laboratory, which taps for our colorless and lets us pay 4 and tap it to investigate, in addition to, on our end phase, if we've sacked 3 or more clues that turn, transforming into Havengul Mystery, which returns target creature from our graveyard into play when it transforms, taps for a black if we pay 1 life, and it transforms back if the creature it reanimated leaves the battlefield, both serving as a source of additional clue tokens if we have the mana to spare, and a payoff for them as we crack them en masse to bring back our creatures from the bin to be used again. And lastly, we'll be running 5 islands, 6 swamps, and 6 mountains as our basics to close out our land base. So, now that we've covered all the cards in the deck, let's take a look at this deck's breakdown. This deck currently has 26 creatures including the commander, 4 instants, 2 sorceries, 3 enchantments, 29 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 45 cards that are considered artifacts, 15 sources of artifact tokens, 24 cards that care about artifacts, 26 cards that can sack themselves or others, 4 sources of protection, and 2 cards that let us copy our commander's ability, giving us a massive amount of artifacts to help fuel our game plan, plenty of payoffs and sack effects for them to turn them into value, damage, and more, along with a handful of ways to keep Ashnod alive and get even more mileage out of her ability so she can helm our build even more effectively. For general deck stats, we have 14 ramp sources, 12 card draw sources, 11 targeted removal sources, and 2 board wipes, leaving us with a near-perfect ratio of core stats with no outliers. Then looking at our mana curve, we have 1 0-drop, 8 1-drops, 22 drops, 16 3-drops, 8 4-drops, 5 5-drops, 3 6-drops, 2 7-drops, and 1 9-drop, resulting in a light to mid-weight curve that aims to ramp quickly in the early game, getting our artifact payoffs, token generators, and sack outlets out as fast as we can, followed by Ashnod so we can begin generating double the value as we sack our artifacts away, outpacing our opponents with the sheer value we can generate while simultaneously burning through their life totals as our artifacts enter and leave play with ruthless efficiency. Currently, this deck is valued at $64.42, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For side grades, if we want to add some additional sack outlets to the build, we can swap out the token generators Loyal Apprentice and Third Path Iconoclast for Dockside Chef and Sage of Latinum to give us even more ways to turn our artifacts into card advantage. And on the flip side, we can cut Jorah Weatherlight Captain in favor of Eloise Nephalia Sleuth to give us another steady stream of clue tokens for our commander to double the value on or to use as sack fodder as needed. Then for upgrades, swapping out Combat Courier for Urza's Bauble will give us another 0 mana draw 2 effect for us to take advantage of, replacing Treasure Chest with Time Sieve would give us easy access to multiple and possibly even infinite turns with the proper board setup, and exchanging Efficient Construction for Biotransference would let us keep the artifact token creation, while also letting us proc our artifact payoffs more often thanks to transforming our entire creature base into artifacts as well. And lastly, cutting Solemn Simulacrum for Dockside Extortionist would provide us with an absolutely insane amount of treasure generation to help fuel our game plan and proc our payoffs. Though keep in mind, this Goblin's Extortion will be affecting our bank accounts well before our opponents considering its price. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. Before we continue, I'd first like to give a big thanks to the channel subscribers for helping us skyrocket all the way to the 8.5k subscriber milestone. Despite my impromptu time off, it seems that you folks have kept the channel growing, so thank you for all your continued support. Moving on to the results of the previous poll, it looks like Egwena Eyes of Gaia was able to claim the top spot from her fellow monocolored rivals, so look forward to a big green build featuring her soon. Then moving on to this week's poll, we'll be moving on from monocolored entrants to tricolored entrants this time around, with this week's contenders being the Surveil-focused Tokasia Digsite Mentor, and a life gain multi-tribal focused the Archmandrite. Please cast your vote in the community tab, link in the description, and let me know in the comments who you voted for and what commanders you want to see from the Brothers War in future polls. And before we close out, again, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel cannot grow without your support. And if you feel like showing your thanks by keeping me caffeinated while I make these videos, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck texts floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.